about trying to share some ideas and allow for others to get inspired. It's in no way a way to try to convince or teach anything. We just share thoughts, and you take it as it lands with you in a way that is appropriate for you. So that is the spirit of this webinar, of this GINPI experience. What I would like to suggest is maybe that because we have been coming from all of kind of places, why don't we, before we start, because this is quite a dense, and Kush is going to show what we're going to do. This is quite a dense moment that we have here. So why don't we take just like 1 minute to just connect with ourselves, to be really open for the material that is going to be shared, and for some really good conversation. Both. Let's just take a 1 minute, which is something that I really like. We also do that with our clients. Let's take 1 minute before we really kick it off.
Episode 2, as I said, collective noble purpose. Now the first and foremost question is, what do we define as a collective? What is a collective? And then how exactly are we focused on a certain type of collective? So Olivia, what is a collective for GINPI and for us?
Yes. So obviously if you allow me, I'm going to take the angle from, I would say, a more professional approach. Although there is many collectives. A family is a collective, a group of friends is a collective. But the angle we're taking for this webinar is really about the collective from a professional approach. So this could be a board of directors, a supervisory board, it can be a management board, it can be an intact team, it can also be a family office that is managing the interests of a family. And it is a collective of people operating, working together. It's doing things together, ideally because they have a common shared interest, which later on we are going to call a noble purpose. So it's a group of people coming together to do something collectively. We're looking at something that is binding and that ideally is bonding people as well. And we're going to explore why it is that very often in collectives there is no bonding. Ideally, a collective has this common goal, and this common goal is what we call noble purpose. It's the nobility that you give to the purpose of why you as a collective, as a group, as a team, you are coming together, you are doing things together as a collective. But we will also be exploring what happens if there is no such a common goal, where actually the individual goals start becoming predominant compared to the collective goal, and why it is that in group or team dynamics we often see that a lot of tensions start arising. There's quite some conflict, and when there's conflict, people don't really know how to resolve it. There is misunderstandings, and the impact also on the entire organization or the stakeholders that are in relation with the collective also either benefit or suffer from the presence or the absence of a collective noble purpose.
Beautifully said. Now, when you're mentioning these powerful, powerhouses, essentially, right? Whether it's intact offices, whether it's board of supervisors, board of directors,
yes,
they're right at the top. And as it is said, that power has this charm way to capture the ego. And then you spoke about how without a purpose, it can easily be lost. So in your experience, I mean, how important it is, especially if sometimes it happens that the leadership team is lost in the ego journey. How does noble purpose comes in, and does it realign them? Can they work without it, or is it absolutely essential?
Yeah. Before I'm going to go there, Kush, I would like to say something to the people present. obviously you have, it is because the focus of GINPI is what we call the high impact leaders. So we focus on business owners, we focus on business leaders, we focus on executive leaders, we focus on governments. But obviously there is a collective also in small local NGOs, in small local associations, in small towns, and all these obviously also operate from a collective. So the principle is exactly the same. It is less our focus, or I would say less our clientele, but the principle as such is the same. So there should not be any misunderstanding about the principles of what I'm going to explain. So first of all, the impact of a collective on an organization and on the stakeholders is huge. Imagine a well-functioning versus a suboptimal functioning management team, the impact it has on an organization. Imagine a family, and we have seen that in the work we do with clients, a family, a group of family members who own a business or who own several businesses. And when family or when part of the family wants to go to disinvesting, and another part of the family wants to go in extra investing, and a part of the family has no idea really what they want. So you have kind of like three groups, three clusters within one collective, which is the family office. We have seen suboptimal working boards of directors where people come with different interests, and yet they have to defend the interest of the organization. So how does that work? How do these people become aware, become conscious of the impact they have on their collective? It is important that when a collective comes together, that really the first question being asked is, what higher order objective are we serving? Why are we here? And that actually puts very clearly on the table the question, am I here to come for my own interest, or am I here to serve through my expertise, through my experience, through my knowledge, my know-how, my wisdom, whatever you want to bring in? Am I here to serve a collective interest? That is the interest of a fund, a foundation, an organization, an investment, an enterprise, an NGO, what have you. And weirdly enough, we see that in the world, a lot of collectives do not take the time to reflect about that. So they come in, they are being hired, or they're being appointed, or they're being asked for their expertise, or for their network, or for a combination of all these things, but they're not being put together to really reflect what is the collective about. On the contrary, those collectives who have really taken the time to reflect about the reason why they are together and how they are going to serve the higher order, what we call the noble purpose of the organization, that becomes very different in dynamics. And so what I am interested in is how a collective is impacting its surroundings, how a collective is influencing the people in the organization and the people outside of the organization, how a collective is being seen, is being felt. How do you perceive a group of people that really works very closely and very neatly and very elegantly in a certain way together, all going for the same common goal, versus an organization, a team, a collective, a board, where there is constant infights, where there is constant misalignment, where there is constant conflicts, as they are in the perception of others all the time being seen and being looked at. It's as if they're working with a megaphone. So whatever they say, whatever they do, is having a huge impact on their surroundings. And so what they say and what they do, if it is aligned, if it is constructive, if it is at the service of something that people can understand, that it will have a positive impact. And obviously, you all understand that if they are, well, fighting with each other, or they are, and I have seen many of these boards where everybody's really going for its own interest. It is being felt in the organization, and certain organizations really suffer. Actually, certain organizations even go bankrupt because the decisions that are taken are so misaligned. There is no compliance control. There is like very little control of objectives, of targets, or who is doing what. And so there is all kind of decisions that are being taken in all kind of departments, all kinds of divisions, all kind of countries, and it becomes just one big mess. And that is because my conviction is that in a collective, the personal interest, and I'm speaking about personal interest, I'm not speaking about personal expertise or personal wisdom, I'm speaking about personal interest, should always be in a lower order than the collective interest. So the personal interest should not take the priority over the collective interest. And we will go there later on, but that is really requiring some specific approaches and quite a high level of consciousness of the people who are in collective. So conclusion could be, if those who are in a collective understand that the impact they have in their surroundings, inside the organization and outside the organization, is really important, and that for that they have to be aware of what kind of impact they create by the way how they are aligned and the way how they are all together defending, working for a collective noble purpose, makes really all the difference.
Wow. So can we think about it this way, that, individuals, if they are aligned to their noble purpose, and that ultimately is aligned to the collective noble purpose, then there is a huge upside of creating that exceptional impact. And then building on that, when we talk about impact, while working with these collectives of top leadership, how can we measure this impact, if I have to define it this way? Because impact in many ways it's about just measured, right? So can you give us some examples where this came across very strongly?
Yeah. So I can ask all of you, look at collectives in which you are involved, look at collectives that impact you, look at collectives that have positively impacted you, look at collectives that have negatively impacted you, and we can draw a list. We could do it actually easily together. What I see is that the impact on an organization is really big. It's huge. It's an impact on the motivation. It is an impact on the alignment. It is an impact on the performance of people. It is an impact on the joy of people, impact on the engagement of people. It is an impact, and always positive or negative, negative, obviously. It has an impact on the creative power in an organization. If you have a very aligned collective, we know from experience, and there is a lot of research done about it, is that there's much more innovation, there's much more creation in such an organization, because people are open, people open up, their minds are opening up, instead of people who have to defend themselves, have to protect themselves. They're in a very different energy, and because of that energy, there is less innovation, there is less creation. So as you asked some examples, and in the preparation, I was thinking of a couple of examples. Mine has been leading in Saint-Gobain, which is a French glass group. It's an industrial group. They do quite some things, but they are mainly known for the glass. So they are a global player amongst the top 3 in the world. He was leading a small division, small, always relative, about 1,000 people, a specialties division. And he had a very specific way, I would even say a very spiritual way of bringing his leadership team together. And so they would do a lot of alignment work, so that they had a very clear understanding of not only the collective goal, the collective noble purpose that that division was serving, but also the way how they were going to do it, the way how they were going to align with each other, so that they could support each other, so that they could support their teams, that they could support their organization in the realization of the strategy, the implementation of all the things that needed to be done. And interestingly, within the big Saint-Gobain, they became the most performing division, to such a level that actually the global chief executive wanted to understand what was happening there, because it was, in a certain way, out of the standards of what they could see in other divisions. So Vincent, who is this friend, was asked to go and explain, and he said what he was doing, and he said how he was doing it, and that got quite some attention in the organization, to a level that actually he was being asked to join the headquarters and start implementing what he had been doing in his own organization. I have another example of a different, another enterprise, which is UCB, which is a Belgian pharmaceutical company. It's a family-owned brand, or family-owned enterprise. And the CEO of the Austria division was somebody who took a lot of time to align his collective. And so they would go on offsite, they would take time, what in many organizations would be considered as wasting of time. Let's get to it, let's get to our objectives, let's produce our quarterly results, let's focus on the targets, etc., etc. I mean, we know all these things. And he had a quite different approach. And the global CEO was actually criticizing him. He said, you're spending a lot of time with your team and you're going on all these offsite. But the same thing happened, actually. The division, the Austria division, which he was heading at the time, became also amongst the most performing divisions of the entire group. And then again, there was interest coming from global headquarters, like, how are you doing it? What is it that you are doing? I'm not saying that the group as such at the time was not aligned. What I'm saying is that at the time that this other friend of mine who was leading it explained me on several occasions, and that is why I got very interested and intrigued in the dynamics of these organizations and how they did it, is by the way how they did it, by focusing that collective noble purpose on what they were standing for together. They became also very performing, and by that financially performing and contributing to the entire organization. I could go on. I'm working closely with Brussels Airlines, which is a division of Lufthansa, where there was at the time there was a lot of strikes going on with the maintenance and engineering division. There was absolutely no collective noble purpose. Making a long story short, there was like 4 different unions trying to get more and more power in the maintenance and engineering division. The maintenance and engineering division is actually a part of an airline where the airlines are being technically checked, or where certain technical problems are being resolved, or where they're simply also being maintained. So imagine each time that a plane is being kept on the ground, it costs lots of money to an airline. And that was actually the strategy of the unions at the time, to keep the airlines on the ground by infighting with each other. So long story short, we have been helping them in defining a collective noble purpose, what they as an organization within the organization were standing for. And we came up with the notion, them serving millions of passengers. And what do passengers want? Passengers want comfort, passengers want safety. So we turned the whole philosophy of their work into, if we could align that you all together, these 4 unions that were fighting with each other, that we all together, that you all together, you actually want to contribute in your own way to the safeguarding of the comfort and the safety and security of passengers by quality work, by being there with high levels of consciousness of what you do and how you do it. All of a sudden, the whole dynamic changed, and people started working together. The 4 unions actually joined forces; they became one union, etc., etc. And obviously, they have never which is really interesting. They have never been striking ever since. So that is the power of putting a collective noble purpose where the whole group or the whole organization is actually aligned and motivated, aligned on and motivated by that what is collective. I'm not in that spirit, but very often when we speak with business leaders or with shareholders, there is an interest, obviously, of financial performance. And so I can tell you today with lots of clarity that the clearer a collective is on why they do what they do, the better the impact, the more positive the impact is going to be on the organization. And so the more positive impact you are going to have on the performance of the organization, and the more, as a result, the more impact that is going to have on the financial performance of the organization. Whether that is a very small organization or whether that is an international conglomerate with hundreds and thousands of co-workers, the principle is exactly the same.
Good, you mentioned the principles. So now that I'm thinking, you're talking about these higher performing collectives inside an organization who had a collective noble purpose, and how they have created these, radiating examples, shining examples within their ecosystem. So if we have to dig slightly deeper into it and then go into the layers of team dynamics, group cohesion, and even multi-party dynamics. So can we say that, whatever you have spoken about, if we have to measure the impact, these principles on which we can measure the impact.
We were asked to work with an executive committee, 9 people or 10 people, and the CEO called me and said, we had done some work before in another context, in another enterprise where he was, and he said, Olivier, we have really an issue. I have never seen anything like this. I have really tried to bring the team members together, but I'm not really successful. And there is even physical aggression. So people were there was so much anger in that team. There was so much frustration. There were so many pink elephants in the room that were not talked about, and that everybody knew that people would really fight physically with each other. They would aggress each other physically. So this was quite new for me as well. We went on a 2-day offsite, and we started having conversations. And we used some approaches, and I will be explaining in a bit what one of these approaches has been. But the idea of letting people talk and letting people come together around something where they have the choice not to. I mean, you can say, I have nothing to do with that collective noble purpose. But then obviously there is a price to pay. Then that means that you will not be able to stay in the collective. That means that you will have to go. But when it is fuzzy, where we don't talk about it, where we don't put the things really straight on the table, like, why is it that we are here together? It is that creates so much confusion. But as we did it, as we had conversations, and we started having, and actually what I was doing was not more than facilitating the conversation in the beginning of, like, why is it that you're here together? What is it that brings you around the table? That brought a very different dynamic, and that brought a very different consciousness. So where people were trying to defend themselves and defend their own cocoa, their own interest, their own divisional or departmental interests, now they started seeing that actually we're in here for something that is bigger than our own interests. And you have to be very clear when you do need to get clarity for a collective. It is to talk about it and explain that is really something that needs to get priority. Now, if you don't want, that's fine, but that means that you're out. So that is also something that you need to say. Another example is a very well-known industrial family having interests in many well-known enterprises, and for confidentiality reasons, I will not mention them here. And so they called on our services because the family office was about to explode because you had three groups. You had one group who wanted to totally disinvest from two of the main activities. Another group wanted to substantially increase investments in one of the major activities. And you had a group in the middle that kind of like was going a bit to the right, a bit to the left, depending upon the direction of the wind coming in, but they had like really no clue. A very old family in the sense that they had been in business for over a century. So not some, I would say, not some new business owners have been there with the whole legacy. And obviously the legacy had to be maintained. And what we did is we started having conversations around the DNA of the family. And they started figuring out that their grandfathers who had created the first family, the first enterprise, they actually were still very grateful for that. They were still very respectful for it. They were actually relating to it. They could see the interest, and especially they could see the interest of how they were impacting their surroundings and how they were impacting the world through their enterprises. And by taking them to a much higher level than these personal interests, because some people were like totally disconnected from the business reality, because some people were like, I remember one was a philosopher, another was a musician, another was a surgeon, and intelligent people, but they had absolutely no connection with business as such. So they didn't really care. They would go left and right. But by understanding that the family interests, which is different than their own personal interests and their own personal ways of looking at the world, the family interests through the enterprises that they were owning were taken to a much higher level. And that collective noble purpose, that what they all were sharing, apart from the DNA, from the family name or the family roots, there was something much more elevating for them that allowed to have very profound conversations. Multi-party dynamics. Well, exactly. It's exactly what it is all about, Kush. And by the way, I love the way how you make these slides. I think they are just amazing. I really like them a lot. So thank you. So in multi-party negotiations, which is a bit different than a collective, but there is the same principle of what is it that brings us together. So imagine you have 3 or 4 or 5 or more parties, or 2 parties. It can also be the same dynamic or the same principle. What we do is when we go into these negotiations, we try to understand and have clarified and put on the table why they are all there. Because ultimo, if there is no common interest, it is going to be a tough negotiation because everybody is going to go in there transactionally. I want to get out as much and I want to give as little. The thing is that everybody is having that same reasoning and that same dynamic. So everybody wants to get out as much as possible and put in as little as possible. That doesn't work. So in negotiations, what is very important is that we try to find that thing that is common, of common interest for all. If we take something which is probably distressing all of us very much, is the current conflicts and the current wars we're having. And when we zoom in to the Palestine-Israel, which I know is a very sensitive and sensible and difficult, complex situation, but why is it that this is still going on? Because there has so far not been found between all the parties involved one common thing that is of higher order than the individual interest. Because technically, all of these problems, each war, each business problem, each family problem can be solved. It is not that it cannot be solved. It is that it needs to be clarified what is actually of a higher order for the parties involved than the individual interests. And so to conclude that part of multi-party or multi-stakeholder, as we also call it, negotiations or interests, it is to look at that thing that really brings all of us together around the table. And then use that as a way, as I would even say a technique, to start having conversations on how together we're going to give and take to the realization or at the surface of the realization of that common goal.
As soon as multi-party negotiations comes in, the first and most powerful association to do with the fact that I'm from India is the India-Pakistan partition. How, without what you said, having that upper umbrella of a bigger purpose, of a bigger noble purpose, how individuals eventually took a decision as a collective that led to millions of lives being lost, another, close to 20 million lives being displaced. And then that created such a big, trauma for the whole of subcontinent. And then building on that, so obviously now with you here, we are talking about it. We cannot leave politics behind. Where do you see the collective noble purpose playing a role in politics? You have already touched upon it, but how do you see it shaping the system, completely changing the system?
Well, I think it's actually the only reason why politics should exist. It is to safeguard democracy. In a democratic political system, it is important that people learn to work together. Learn to work together for something that is beyond, above, higher than the party interests. And whether you have a bi-party system, like in mainly Anglo-Saxon countries, or you have a multi-party political system, like in many Western European countries, or in certain Asian countries, where you have sometimes 15, 20 parties, all fighting for power, I think it is important that those who come to power have to learn to work for a common goal, to see how difficult it has become in a globalizing world to find that common goal. And the reason why, unfortunately, we are seeing an extreme rightization of politics of the world is because there is so much short-term infighting between political parties that they forget, the leaders in the political system, they forget what is actually the reason why they are there. And that is not to serve their own interest, exactly as in a board of directors or a management board. One is not there to serve the own interests. One is there to bring into one's own expertise and wisdom the collective interest. Actually, I'm, as we speak, researching. This is a very Belgian focus because we're going to have in Europe, as many of you know, we're going to have elections in June and then in October. And so I'm researching the presence or the absence of a collective noble purpose in politics, and it's really interesting what I'm learning. So I will be sharing some of these things once my research is done.
We have spoken about impact teams, organizations, and how even in politics it helps. Can we quickly just see the iceberg model? Because individually the iceberg model you have beautifully described in your book of noble purpose, but at the same time, for a collective, when we are talking about a collective, how much of this methodology is used to actually align the collective together as well?
Okay, good. I'll do this very briefly, and let me go back to the example of the client where the executive committee members were physically aggressing each other. We all come with our own baggage and our own backpack. In that case, that group of executives was coming to the enterprise. And they have all expectations and they have all intentions and they have all lots of things. But as long as the collective noble purpose is not clarified, the own interest is going to be very present because the own interest is there to what people think unconsciously, to safeguard our own place in a collective. So my reason to exist is how I can show that I exist in a collective. Now, if everybody, in that case, these 9 or 10 people, they start doing that, it becomes chaos and it becomes a mess. The way, and this is one of the methodologies that we use and that I'm happy to share, the way how we do it is we start looking at the needed behavior. So what is the behavior that you need to have this collective work at service of the common, together, defined noble purpose? And then what is the contrast with the behaviors that you see? So you have an idea of what you want to be, the kind of behavior you want to have, but then we look at what is the behavior, or what are the behaviors that each of you have today in this dysfunctioning collective. And then we ask people to look at their beliefs, at their values, at their needs, and at their fears. So we accompany them so we explain beliefs, values, needs, fears for to take a deep dive. That is why it is the iceberg approach, because an iceberg, what you can see is 15%. What you cannot see is about 85% of an iceberg, which means the part that you can see, what I consider as the behaviors that you can see, is being supported by this huge mass of things that can become a mess if we don't work consciously with it and within the team or within the collective. That is understanding what one's individual beliefs, values, needs, and fears are. And then we ask people to share these beliefs, values, needs, and fears with each other. Obviously, this is in a process. We just don't do this in a blunt way, but just to make it short. And then all of a sudden, the magic happens, because people now start understanding why I do certain things and why he or she does not do certain things, because we have different beliefs about something, or we have different values, or we have different needs. And the more we are clear on the collective interest, the collective noble purpose, and the more we know from each other, and I do push people to say that doing that work, clarifying that, has nothing to do with your private life. This is the only way for me, and it is close to psychological work, but it is the only way to be able to work together in a powerful, collegial, inspiring, and very strong way. Then sort of like just pretend and just come in with all the expertise and all the background and all the titles of before, etc., etc., etc. They don't really matter, because what really matters is so-called the below iceberg shit, the below iceberg preferences, the below iceberg dynamics. And that is what we do in the work to help people.
My experience is that people have a hard time to get an answer on their own individual purpose. So how do you work around that?
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Anna, for that. Very good question. So in the work we do, we ask people to either share or get an idea of what is their own individual noble purpose. Because if the individual noble purpose, or something that people would not necessarily define as their individual noble purpose, but something that is close to them, the reason why they get up every morning is very distant from what the collective noble purpose is going to be, when it's going to have a hard time to align and to attach, to connect with the collective noble purpose. So ideally, a collective noble purpose is nourished by the individuals who have their own noble purposes. And one would hope that the noble purpose of each individual is actually bringing them to that organization, to that NGO, to that enterprise, to that project, what have you, because they feel connected with what that organization is standing for.
So thanks, Olivier. Thanks, Kush. The session was quite interesting in the sense that I worked a lot of years in a multinational of the in the water sector, we can say.
Yes.
And we used to work with the stakeholders. And I think what you are saying is quite interesting to define what's the novel focus or the novel purpose for each one of the stakeholders. I think that it's one of the key things if you want to get to success in a company. And in this sense, what I wanted to ask you is, how do you mix not only the novel purpose, also the expectations of all of these stakeholders, plus what the company has to offer to answer this kind of expectations? Because the novel purpose is a thing, but then the company has to have the power to react to that.
Yeah. So this is actually the topic that we're going to talk about in about a month, when there's another webinar where we're going to tackle the theme of the organizational noble purpose, which is the one which is for all the people in the organization. But obviously, I'm not going to say come to that one, and now I'm not going to answer. That's not what I will do. So I will be brief. The dynamic that I believe is the one to have in an organization is that all the stakeholders are aligned on one same noble purpose, that is the noble purpose of the organization, or the noble purpose of the project, or the noble purpose of the foundation, what have you. So the noble purpose of the system. And the way to do it is to have then the conversations with all the parties involved. So, for example, if we take an example of an enterprise, it would be that the shareholders, the board of management, the people working in the organization, the clients, the suppliers, let's not forget the suppliers, the communities in which they work, the unions, any lobby organization that is working around or with the organization, that they all get aligned, and that requires a very conscious and a very strong leadership, that they all get aligned on the same noble purpose for the organization. That is actually the only way to do it. And so it requires quite some conversations and quite some alignments of the management board, in some cases the supervisory board, to align everybody on that noble purpose. And more, Ignacy, in I don't know exactly when it is, the 27th or the 28th of something of March, this is going to be the topic of that webinar.
To work with Asian companies who have more collectivity, the collectivity in mind than personal matters. Is it easier to work with them on noble purpose or not?
No, because what from experience working with Asians is what we see is that often they will speak up less about what is really of interest to themselves. So we might think, from a cultural perspective, we might think that they have more of a collective interest, but often we see it is because they kind of like put themselves a little bit in a, I would say, I was going to say, they submit themselves to the collective. That's probably a bit too strong a word, because I also see differences between Japan, Indonesia, China, the Philippines. So it's really very different dynamics. It is because they have a different way of dealing with individual noble purpose. And the interesting thing, or India, having been several times to India, is the way around it is to have or ask people to think of what is important for them, and let them understand that an individual noble purpose is something different than an individual interest. And when you have that clarified, people, especially in Asia, they will take more space, they will take more place, they will take the right presence in the collective, or in the conversations or the negotiations around the collective. Because there is often, I have seen in certain Asian countries, that they think that by speaking out what is important for them, and which in our work we think that it is very important, if you really want to clearly and strongly work together, you need to be clarified and you need to understand what is important for each of us, what makes us tick. That is a different thing than what is our individual noble purpose. Right? So by clarifying exactly what I'm clarifying to you, helps people to commit and to engage in the collective of the organization.